Hello? How's everybody doing, okay?
Yeah.
You can do better than that. My name is Scary Jones from Elvis Duran and the Z100 Morning Show. New York's #1 hit music station, Z100, and we wanted to be here for this. We always come to the cool stuff, and it's nice to be invited. Are you guys excited to be here?
Yeah!
Welcome to Town Hall. This building is cool, right? This is a great place to have something like this. It's got so much history. I was walking around, the floorboards were creaking back there. It's like all kinds of fun stuff. And you're going to hear a lot about this whole neighborhood in just a couple of minutes, about some cool ghost stories and some fun stuff. We'll get to that in a second. First of all, we want to thank our friends at Focus Features for putting this together today. Right? I take it you guys are the diehard fans, right?
Yeah!
You've seen the first two?
Yeah!
You're ready for the prequel, of course, right?
Yes!
Awesome. So we have some fun stuff for you planned. Of course, Lynn Shay will be here a little later. And we can get some cool stuff there. And we also are going to be doing some cool contests. So you can win some money and maybe a trip to LA, right? To the premiere screening out there, the red carpet screening. So we'll do that. We'll get to that in a little while. Just want to let you guys know that obviously Insidious, as you know, I don't know if you realize, their Facebook page has 4 million likes and fans. And they're fans just like you guys. And right now they're doing 5 events in 5 cities across America doing this trailer launch. So this is kind of cool. You're part of a very select group of people. Of all, New York, Miami, LA, Chicago, Houston, that's where it's going on. This is happening right now in those cities. So thank you for coming this afternoon. Of course, we want to also follow on social media. If you can, when you have a chance, follow on Instagram at Insidious Movie. And also upload to social using hashtag Insidious. Anytime, anywhere, anytime you can talk about the film with your friends or, when you're getting excited for it. It's June 5th release. That's going to be cool stuff. Right now, though, I want to bring out our first guest. She is so interesting. I was just talking to her in the green room backstage, and she is amazing. She's got a lot of knowledge about the history of New York, all kinds of ghost stories and crimes and true crimes from the turn of the century. She knows about stuff that was happening in this neighborhood, creepy things from years ago, and she was so fascinating to talk to, and I can't wait to bring her out on stage real quick. She also hosts. She's an award-winning, best-selling novelist. She has 7 novels out there, and after the show, she'll be in the lobby. I want you to pick up one of her cards. She is the licensed guide for this thing called Boroughs of the Dead. Boroughs of the Dead is a tour around New York City. It's really cool stuff. You might want to check it out. I know I'm going to head out there. She got me hooked just by talking to her for 5 minutes about her stories. And you're going to meet her right now. Please welcome to the stage, Leanna Renee Heber.
What is she doing?
Thank you. What a great intro. Hey, darlings. Who wants to hear a ghost story? Are you ready? Yeah. So, I work for Boroughs of the Dead tour company. I tell real ghost stories. They're real, you guys. At this point, we've got about a few centuries worth of hauntings in this city. So, one of the great things about the new Insidious film is that it's a prequel, so we get to go back and see how all this started. One of the great things about telling ghost stories in New York is that as modern New Yorkers, it's kind of nice to know some of the stuff that has come before. So here's some prequels. I'm going to tell you 3 ghost stories that are in different parts of the city, but the last one's going to come right close by, creeping up near you here in the theater district. So, Boroughs of the Dead does tours all throughout various areas of New York City. New York City is as haunted as it is populous. And, the borough of Queens, by the way, has more dead people than living people, by the way, because of all of the graveyards out in Queens. So So just, a little population stat for you. And the great thing about New York City is not only is it populous with ghosts, but it has as diverse a community of ghost stories and types of hauntings as there are different types of people in this city. So one of the great things about Insidious, all kinds of different ways you are terrified. And I hear, that this is going to be the scariest Insidious yet. So, how about that? As if the others weren't terrifying enough. So, okay, good. Bring it on. So, in this case, the great thing about the ghost stories I'm going to tell you is that they're all different types of hauntings. There's not just one way we see a ghost. There's lots of different ways that we see a ghost. Now, whether you're a skeptic or whether you're a believer, I'm not trying to convert you one way or another, but I'm just telling you what has been documented over years and years and years and years of stories and mediums and psychics and investigations and people who are not at all believers telling the same corroborated stories. At Birds of the Dead, we do not try and feed you bull. We try and make sure that they are very well researched stories. And I'm going to tell you 3 that are in every single ghost story book that you would find in the city. And they're, and I encourage you to go and look up these things, and also come on a Birds of the Dead tour, and we'll tell you in person. So, one of the great things about the Greenwich Village ghosts is the different types of hauntings. So you've got your apparitions that you might see. You've got stuff that you might hear. You've got orbs, right? Everybody knows the orbs in the pictures, right? When you take a picture and there's a floating thing that's not really dust, it's probably a spirit, hanging out next to you in your selfie, and the orb, trying to get your selfie. So the ghosts in the Greenwich Village area, specifically I'm going to start with one on Gay Street, 12 Gay Street. Now, the name of Gay Street does not have anything to do with the orientation of the village. It is because the family whose last name was Gay had land there. So there we go. So on 12 Gay Street, the house that's there is a triple layer cake of haunting. Every floor has a haunting, and all different kinds of hauntings. So this is one of my favorites because you've got an audible haunting, you've got visible, you've got sensorial, you can smell. There's even hauntings that smell. How about that? So ghosts have all kinds of ways they want to communicate with us. So at 12 Gay Street, Frank Paris used to live there in the 1950s. Now Frank Paris, you might not know him, but you probably know Howdy Doody, the show Howdy Doody with the puppets. Very famous old show. His company, Paris Puppets, owned and worked out of that space. Now the building itself dated back to the late 1700s, early 1800s, so very, very, very old property, and it's currently being renovated. So what's interesting about that is, we all know that, you all are ghost story fans, right? So I'm going to assume that you all know that when you change a house, a ghost doesn't like it. So the new tenants, I can't wait to hear the ghost stories that come out of the new tenants that are like, yeah, the ghosts are not happy with my new shower. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. We'll be ready to take down the new ghost stories to tell you on the next tours. But Frank Paris noticed that he would be awoken or would hear, as he was working in the basement on his puppets, that he would hear screams and various moans and unintelligible things that kind of sounded like they were French. A little bit of background research found out that there had been a French diplomat who had been tortured on that premises, thinking that he was a French spy. He wasn't, but he's still lamenting his protestations as the torture went a bit too far, and they didn't really get anywhere with that, and his spirit has never left the building. So you've got an audible haunting of a ghost in pain. You've got another ghost of a visible ghost of a guy wearing a nice fancy suit and wandering around the building, and he's having a grand time because in the 1920s, 12 Gay Street was known as the Pirates' Den. It was where singer Betty Compton, who was a very famous jazz singer, that's where she lived because she'd been bought this property by Jimmy Walker, the, at the time, mayor of New York City, who was her lover, and they were running basically a gin joint out of there because it was the 1920s, it was Prohibition, and it was a big old party house. So there is a 1920s dressed spirit who just had a really good time one night and never left. And don't we hate those party guests who's like, wouldn't you leave? And it's centuries later, right? We're in the next century and he still won't go home. So we've also got a guy who met his tragic end early into the 19th century, so late 1800s, early 1900s. This poor guy, like, this house had gone through many, many different hands through the years, and this guy was actually on his way to his daughter's wedding. So he was in his finest, and he got run over by a carriage right outside the door. So his ghost does on a loop. So in some hauntings, ghosts are like on repeat, right? They're sort of reliving the most important or the most horrible moment for them. That would really stink, to be a spirit who's stuck in that kind of time loop, right? So you've got that kind of that sort of echo, right? And he comes down from the top of the stoop out to the street and then disappears. So his last moment keeps replaying. Now, Frank Paris told all of these stories and said, this is what I see, this is what I've known, and this was then investigated by some by mediums at the time. Hans Holzer was a really great basically manager. He and his mediums would go and investigate stuff, and he would write books about it. And so Frank's story was then corroborated later on. See, the thing about, a ghost story is real when people have completely not spoken, and there's generations and decades between, and stuff comes to light and it's the same story. Walter Gibson, so you guys heard of the radio program called The Shadow, or The Shadow Knows? So he operated out of the top floor of 12 Gay Street, and he heard and saw and dealt with all the exact same hauntings, but he didn't tell anybody, because he himself was going through a bit of a mental break. He himself was and he assumed that people would just think, oh, well, it's because you're doing this radio program about mystery and all this kind of stuff, and so of course you're just making this up, right? So he didn't tell a soul until after he left the building, and this was decades later. So this corroborated what Frank Paris had said. William Kunstler, who was a very famous liberal attorney who lived across the street, went on television and said, yeah, these are the things that happened at Club 12 Gay Street. I mean, he's a respected attorney and said all this. So at this point, with all this corroboration, that stuff's totally true. And I have to sort of say there's an air that the places that are the most spectacularly haunted in New York City, you definitely can feel that there's an air there. You can feel that there's a history there. Even if you can't see the spirits, you can see the spirit of the building, you can feel the spirit of the building. And you can feel that there's something that's transpired there. There's an extra something there that's hard to put your finger on. Similarly so with the next story. And in this one actually has, I think, some of the most relevance to Insidious, because the most haunted premises in New York City is 14 West 10th Street. Now, Greenwich Village, right? It's a beautiful, 14 West 10th Street is gorgeous. Emma Lazarus lived on the block. She wrote The New Colossus, which is the poem that's on the base of the Statue of Liberty. It's these gorgeous $1 million properties, and then there's 14 West 10th Street, which is evil down to its bricks and mortar. This building, it's just wrong. It just has something wrong with it. The stories of 14 West 10th Street go all the way back to Mark Twain. Mark Twain lived there for a year. He left, claiming his wife couldn't keep up with the housework. Well, no, I think it was because of whatever demonic something or something is in the bricks of that house. Now, that building was built in the 1840s, and for whatever reason, there has been just something living there that is bad. Now, I myself, I kind of can feel and sense spaces, if they're kind of positive or negative, and the negative energy around that particular building is really intense. In fact, I always have a hard time talking about it. I have a hard time when I'm doing the ghost tours in front of it. I always get a little twitchy when I'm out in front of it, and I have a hard time speaking about it because the energy of the place does affect me, and it does affect people in the house. He was seen by a resident coming down the stairs and said, looked point blank at the resident of 14 West 10th Street and said, my name is Clemens, and I got a score here, I got to settle. Samuel Clemens was the actual name of Mark Twain. So, well, what did he have to settle? The what of this building is not known.
the negativity is well documented. There's a book called Spindrift. Jan Bryant Bartell lived both at 14 West 10th and next door at 16 West 10th. And there's a wall that is shared between those two residences. She wrote a book called Spindrift, documenting her almost 20 years in both of those buildings. She lived in 16 and 14. And there was this dark shadow that would pass from 16 to 14. And the building itself would just make people ill. In the course of her time there, 20-some people died of mysterious circumstances. Whether it was cancer, whether it was various other strange diseases. Her dog went instantly crazy, would stare at a spot on at the wall. She herself would see these shadows pass between the wall between 16 and 14. There was, basically a medium was called in to try and contact the spirits of the place. There was a lady in gray with a gray cat that said everything was just fine. Yeah, right. They always tell you it's fine, and it's not fine at all. So Jan herself began to suffer from a lot of exhaustion, and she was drained, she was fatigued, she was ill. She, when she did finally leave that building, she died about a year later. So the people that would stay in that building and then leave the building also had tragically short lifespans. This was also the building where there was a pretty famous, if anybody is longtime New Yorkers here, the Joel Steinberg case, where a lawyer, he was a lawyer, and he beat his child to death. It was an illegally adopted child, and he beat her to death. Her name was Lisa. He's still in prison serving time for this. He lived there, and residents and friends said that he was this nice guy. I mean, you have to be pretty smart to pass the bar and be a lawyer. And so he was this intelligent man who had been very well-meaning and had been very level-headed. And when friends said that when he moved in to 14 West 10th, he went on a downward spiral psychologically of abuse. And they blamed the building for his decline, and he is still in prison serving that. So the caretaker of 14 West 10th Street has said, at least the caretakers of the past have said, that the building is cursed. I notice going by it as often as I do for work that there's not always a lot of lights on. There are residents there, and there are, and obviously the realty company is not going to tell you all of this stuff because they want the $1 million residents, around, because it is a very, very high-end neighborhood. But in and of itself, there's something wrong with that building. So, and so much so that I had to put it in, I am a novelist, and I had to put that address in my latest book, The Eternal Files, because I can't go by that place without being affected by it. And so something that powerful. I mean, I hear that in Insidious 3 we're going to see something that is more terrifying than the Red Demon. Okay, more, what? Okay, so, I mean, all right, I guess bring it on, but then I guess maybe I can only see this during the daytime, because, I mean, I deal with ghost stories, and this seems a bit much. So I'm very excited to see what we're going to have our socks blown off by all of this. And I'm dealing with the real life stuff, so if the stuff that's the stuff that's fiction can spook me out in addition to the real life stuff, we're doing something right. And last but not least, the Belasco Theater. So over just one block up on 44th Street is the Belasco Theater. Beautiful theater, built in 1907 by David Belasco. And now he was a really intense guy, and they called him the Bishop of Broadway because he would wear, back in the early 20th century, men would wear starched collars that would sometimes be detachable from the shirts. You wash them, keep them white, keep them clean that way. He would wear it backwards, so it looked more like a cleric's collar, so they called him the Bishop of Broadway. And he was this really intense guy who would try and really, really push his actors. He was also obsessed with all newfangled technology. So the Belasco was the first elevated stage that Broadway had. So the theater district benefited from the advancements of the Belasco Theater because everyone wanted to keep up with, what Belasco was doing in his theater. He, of course, named it for himself. He was this force of nature. And the first elevated stage, he had a separate scene shop that would keep track of all the innovations in stagecraft. So all kinds of experiments were going on. He's sort of like the Tesla of stagecraft. And so he was always interested in realism, and all Slavsky over, one of the men responsible for a lot of our modern acting methods, brought him over in the Moscow Art Theater. So it was very, very intense. He would actually he would push his actors so much, sometimes physically, push his actors so much that he would take out a pocket watch, and he would get so angry if one of them didn't do what he wanted them to do. He would get the pocket watch out and he would stomp on it in front of the actor and then say, "See what you made me do? This was my grandmother's watch." And the actor would be just horrified. And any of the resident company members would just sort of turn away, because that trick worked once on them before. Then they saw the drawer of watches, the cheap Chinatown watches that Velasco had procured for this particular effect. So he loved pushing people to the edge. So he was so involved in his theater, when he built the theater, he built himself his own apartment in the theater. So there is the Velasco apartment that has a separate elevator that he could come and go and watch through a peephole. This is a little creepy. Watch through a peephole the performances and check in on how everything was doing on stage during rehearsals. He lived for the theater, quite literally. And he retired in 1930, and he lasted a year before he died. It's because his life was the theater. And when he retired from theater, his life was over. And immediately after his death, they closed up the apartments, but they still heard the elevator shaft running up to the apartments that no one was in and no one was allowed in. And so the sounds of the Velasco apartments have been going on because David is still there. He appears on every opening night. He's a very striking individual. You can't miss him. He'll appear from his box because, of course, the elevator in his own private apartments, of course, had a separate box that would come out and look over the stage. We could sit and appreciate the performance. Every opening night, Velasco will come out and watch from his box. He's so present with the theater. He's almost inextricable. So it's interesting for me to see the range of different stories that we have in New York City, again, representing the amazing wealth of talent and interesting people that we have here through the years. So centuries worth of people coming and going and making things and making art and telling ghost stories. And I hope that this will give you just a little bit of a taste. Hope that this has whetted your appetite for the much deeper, scary stagecraft we're going to go into as we see what's up for Insidious. So if you're interested in taking a ghost tour, Burrows of the Dead, we are one of the premier ghost tour companies in the city, so I'll be out in the lobby handing out bookmarks afterwards if you guys want any of that, and I will be here really excited to see the trailer and everything else that is going on up here. Thanks to everybody, thanks to Focus Features, thanks to Town Hall, and thanks to you guys for wanting to hear some ghost stories. I appreciate it. Good night.
Once again,